So I'm honored to be here today, to be joining this dedicated group of world workers and share some reflections on how this new framework, the SDGs, could support the shift of a prevailing narrative of separation in which humanity sees itself as separate from and even above the rest of nature, to a narrative of co-evolution, where we harmonize our human activities with the continuing regeneration of life on our planet. So basically, we're going to be reflecting how this new framework, SDGs, can help us with this shift between the discourse of separation to a discourse of co-evolution. That's what I'm going to be exploring with you today. And if it gets really complex, please let me know, because then the most important is that we travel together with our thinking. There's no point of me speaking at you here. We need to walk together. So if you don't understand, or if my colleague translating into French has difficulty to translate concepts like nested system or something like that, we'll stop, understand, and continue. I have 35 minutes of conversation with you. By now, 32, possibly. Yeah? So my talk, my exploration will have 5 movements. I start with the preamble. Then I'm going to be introducing the concept of regenerative development that is different than sustainable development, is regenerative development. We're going to look at 2 principles. There are many principles, but we look at 2 principles. Then we're going to take from the principles what are some attitudes that we can adopt as world workers in this shift of the separation to co-evolution, and some concluding thoughts. So I'll start by saying that there is this international consensus that our generation right now is facing a convergence of multiple crises, which is different than before facing this crisis or that crisis. Right now we are facing a convergence of multiple crises. Which are these crises? Do you agree with the concept? And let's name some of the crises that our generation is facing. Which one? Poverty? Mm-hmm. In which sense environment? Climate change? Uh-huh. Migration. Mm-hmm. Yes. So it is a convergence, you know, financial, that can come from the economic, the social, the ecologic, is a convergence. And the most interesting is that there is this realization that the same mindset that has created the convergence cannot solve it. That's, for me, is the most important. That's something that Einstein said way back, you know, the mind that has created the problem cannot solve it. So let's hold this idea that we are facing a convergence of crises, but the mindset, the framework, the discourse that has created cannot solve it. So we need a different framework, a different mindset. So do we start solving the crisis or changing the mindset, or do both at the same time? Okay. So I could go back as much as we could in terms of digging in the concept of sustainable development. And I think it's always important that we go back into history, otherwise in our dialogues, it's like trying to plant cut flowers. So I could go back to Rachel Carson and Silent Spring, when the first time that we realized the way humanity was treading upon the planet was not going to sustain. There were limits to growth in our planet. But we have to go forward very quick, from Silent Spring to Brundtland Commission to the first definition of what is sustainable development, meeting the needs of our generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And we go fast forward until we get into Rio +20. So Rio +20, the only thing that the decision makers and head of states could agree was a process to define a set or a global framework to address this convergence of multiple crises and somehow redirect humanity towards a sustainable pathway. We had many other attempts before with Agenda 21, Johannesburg, so many attempts, but this was a renewed attempt. We have a convergence of crisis, how we're going to frame this, and how we're going to, at the same time that we reframe the crisis, we have to put humanity in a sustainable pathway. There followed a 3-year process involving UN member states, 83 national surveys, engaging over 7 million people and thousands of actors from the international community, making it the biggest consultation ever in UN history. The goals, the 17 goals, have thus been heavily negotiated and have a broad legitimacy amongst all parties. So the breadth and depth of this new framework is unprecedented, addressing issues like poverty, hunger, health, education, cities, energy, work, industry, inequalities, consumption, climate, ocean life, ecosystems, peace and partnerships, and like every form of international agreement, the SDGs are the result of an uneasy compromise. And we're going to be looking, what is this uneasy compromise? Discourses, I think way back, we have Foucault saying that discourses create frameworks which structure social life through which power is exercised. It's pretty complex as Foucault's mind. I'm going to repeat. Discourses, what we're doing here with you is sharing narratives. Whatever is our narratives, these are discourses, they create frameworks through which, and this framework structures social life through which power is exercised. So the broad range definition of what is sustainable development, or the sustainable development concept, in use today, used by all the member states, demonstrate a series of what we call, we could say, internal flaws that must be addressed before the concept of sustainable development is adopted as the main development approach for humanity right now. So we need to look, what is sustainable development before we go to the goals? Is it complex, or are you following? We are following. You are following, thanks, good. At least one person is following. Yes? We going? Okay, so let's look at the concept before we go to the goals. So for many, or for some, let's say for some, the sustainability concept fails to offer guidance on how to arbitrate, how to balance, between the conflicting drivers of economic growth, planetary boundaries, and social justice. Achieving these goals requires a profound transformation in the way we live, think, and act in resonance with the living earth. For the regenerative theorists, and now I'm bringing a regeneration concept here, at a time of increasing global threat to the livingness of the earth, it is more important than ever to understand not just how living systems survive or even thrive, but how they stay on a progressive course towards increasing vitality, viability, and potential. It's not about only sustaining, it's not only about regeneration, but how the systems that we are part of it as humanity can survive, thrive, and how we can increase the vitality, the viability, and its own potential. So, in short, how humanity can redesign its presence in the planet. That's, for me, is the greatest design challenge that I face, that we face, how to redesign our presence in the planet. So, a key question could be how we can stay close to the livingness, to the evolution of the planet, ready to be affected and affected by the living planet, as we unravel this convergence of multiple crises through or via the Sustainable Development Goals framework. I don't even myself know how to answer that, but it's like putting a question as a guiding, as a quest. Yeah? So I would like to explore further the concept of regenerative development, which argues that how, in an unpredictable world, one can enable the places where we live and work to thrive, going well beyond merely sustaining a precarious balance. Lots of the SDGs, or the concept of sustainable development, is about sustaining a balance. And our presence in the planet has been so forceful and sometimes disruptive that we cannot not only sustain, we have to regenerate. That's why our quest is bigger than the SDGs. This requires finding ways to continually and consciously regenerate ourselves and our thinking, because it's not regenerating only ecosystems outside of us, but because we are part of the ecosystems, how can we regenerate ourselves and our thinking? And revisioning our place as humans in new ways, with new potential, because regeneration of the planet or the living systems is regeneration of ourselves. So it has a potential for the planet and a potential for ourselves, within what David Bohm would say, an unending process of movement and unfoldment in the continuous of evolution. So this regenerative design concept is grounded in this deep understanding of the interdependent nature of living systems. And we talk about living systems all the time. I talk about the human systems and the biotic systems. And we didn't know how to say biotic in French. It's the biological systems, but we have biology as well. But it is the interdependence of both. But how can we make all these concepts in practice? I'll give you an example how we can be regenerative. It's common knowledge in international circles that the SDGs will create at least $12 trillion in new market opportunities by 2030. The goals intend to bring millions of people previously left largely to public aid into the global economy. They're going to be consumers. They enter into the economy. There's no more aid. There's only investment and social entrepreneurship. That's the model. It's beyond, the model is beyond aid, is empowerment, bringing people to economy. But what sort of economy? Business cannot succeed or economies cannot succeed in ecologies and societies that fail. So we need to have an integrated design. That paradigm that measures growth and wealth by the speed through which we extract, produce, consume, and throw away, as quick as we do this in a linear way, as much money we generate and as more GDP we have and richer we are. This model is obsolete. It's already obsolete since I was born, basically. And I'm your generation. In any case, economists and all of us, we need to go into training. We have to go into education. We need to start training ourselves in becoming regenerative practitioners, designers, redesigning our presence in the world. We need to go to, for instance, at the very heart of the markets and align new revenue opportunities with a value-generating capability that make both people and the rest of the natural world stronger, more vibrant, and resilient. In this context, ecological and economic decisions should coincide with the ecosystem's boundary, using what is called the resources, the natural resources, efficiently within the system in regenerative loops where the waste of one system is nourishment for the other system. Can be profitable, and it can be better for the environment, on which all business are dependent. And that's fundamental. There's no economies that can thrive in environments and societies that fail. The premise is very clear. The carbon-intensive waste economy concentrated in narrow bands of the population, where 2% of humanity holds 80% of the wealth, has had its day. Just holding a moment of silence, a pregnant pause here. Is it too complex? Are you accompanying me, or I'm speaking to myself? Can I continue? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we live and breathe in nested systems of intelligence and activity. For those who follow Lucis Trust, it's important to know that I take lots of my inspiration from the school. So why we develop our strategies, educational programs, services, products, one should always think about SDGs as a framework that is framing the convergence of crises, and using them in a system, in a nested system that at the same, whenever you activate one SDG, that has like a catalyst impact in many other SDGs. The goals were designed to interact So designing to progress 2 or 3 of them all together is really important. I'll give you an example. We're working with cities now into advancing the SDGs because some of our countries, either they are not bought into the SDGs or they are lost in my case with the Brexit discussions. So we decided to start working more and more with cities. And cities says, oh, you haven't signed a climate agreement, so we'll sign the climate agreement. You're not doing SDGs, but we can do at municipal level. So as we start working with cities, it's very clear that cities can prioritize those catalyst SDGs that can start up, kick off the process of systemically advancing the agenda. So by adopting this nested system thinking, we enter into a kind of resonance dance. And while activating local responses, we're also adding higher order value to larger processes of regional and global impact. So if you cannot do the global, we can start on the local, but thinking systemically, as you activate here, you're activating all the system. So going for the good of the whole, whenever we take decisions, we think about the locality, the proximate whole, and the greater whole. The proximate whole and the greater whole. And if you think systemically like this, and your intention is behind that, know that you are impacting the locality, the proximate, and the greater whole. So going for the good of the whole, leveraging interlinkages with other SDGs, and remember that the parts of the system cannot survive without the whole. I say to my students, there's no private salvation. I come from the eco-village movement. I lived for 18 years in Finhorn, that is known as a model of sustainable living. And I keep saying to my colleagues at the eco-village movement, there is no, I mean, we can have the most well-designed laboratory, but if this cannot be replicated in other situations, there is not going to be private salvation. So we need to think about how, by doing that, I am adding value to the proximate and the greater whole. And that takes intentionality. We need to intend for that. This is what I said, the mind has to go together with the design. If we intend to do, we are already changing the mindset and trying to readdress the convergence of crisis with new mindsets. So, I've done 2 parts. I've done a preamble. I've done a little bit of exploration of the concept. Now I would like to work with 2 principles. I have how much more time? 10 minutes, okay. I think it's important that I'll take 2 principles of this regenerative quest that we have. One is about designing for evolution. Why? Because the capacity for evolution is inherent, is embedded in all living systems. It has been core to life's ability to sustain itself for billions and billions of years. The capacity of evolution is embedded to all living systems. So design for evolution is a key principle for us. We are designing for evolution. We're just taking a lift into an evolutionary process. Does this mean that we can design the evolution that we humans aspire? It means that we can design and develop. Now becomes a little bit complicated, but let's see if we can get there. The intrinsic and extrinsic conditions that enable living systems to become agents of their ongoing evolution as partners, and we as partners in a larger co-evolution. So we're moving here for an idea of co-evolution. We're not the kings and the queens of the castles that we are now going to look at ecosystems and we do this here and we do this there and they start to be more resilient. No, we are together, co-evolving together in mindset and in practice. Let's breathe again. Can I get a sip of my water?
Oh, sure.
I have 7 more minutes to make sure that I make sense until the end. I want to bring one concept that is really, I think is really important for this conversation, which is the concept of edge work. That's the second principle. The co-design, design for evolution, and the second one is edge work. Let's imagine that 2 ecosystems, savanna and forest, they meet in a territory. There's a moment that one ecosystem meets the other one. When savanna meets the forest, you have a zone that is called buffer zone. It's a zone of transition where you normally have the species of the forest and you have the species of the savanna, but you also create conditions for species specific to that ecosystem to emerge. I'm from Brazil, and when I grew up, and my great-grandmother was indigenous, she was lassoed, captured by my great-grandfather, who was European. And I worked for many years with the traditional people in Brazil. And they say, May, you don't work with us, you walk with us. So I walked with them for many years. And whenever we were entering a place where, for instance, river would meet ocean, they say, shh, quiet, go very quiet. Not only speaking, but quiet in your mind as well. And I said, why? And they say, because this is a place where the earth rests. And we should not impact. This is the edge work. There is a technical term called ecotone that comes from the Greek ecology's intention. Tension, because you have forest, savanna, and you create. So whenever if you want to design for diverse, and edges are places of great diversity, intensity, life is stronger, more vital in the edges. So if you're a designer for ecological systems, you always, it's a principle of ecological design that says maximize the edges, because in the edges you have more life, and then you are co-designing for evolution by maximizing edges. Did you get that one? So, but I want to go further on this concept. I have a working hypothesis that says that just as it is possible to maximize the edges and diversity between neighboring biological communities like forest and savanna, so it is possible to create a larger edge effect in society. An edge effect between social groupings, different social groupings with diverse worldviews, power structures, and intentions. So I've been working with migrant communities for some time, and I've been experiencing what I coined this concept called social tone, which is society's intention. That's what happens when our brothers and sisters are coming from Northern Europe and we are welcoming them in Catania, for instance, in Sicily. So you can see social tone in action there. How can you maximize the edges? How can you take those maybe 40 abandoned medieval villages, and bring life force with those sisters and brothers that are coming. How to maximize edges, turn the social tone in productive cycles. That's the work that we have been invited to do these days. There's 3 principles, and I'll finish, for us as world workers, as designers of an unfolding life. And that's something that, as I speak to you, it reminds me as well. First of all, is position ourselves within the flow of life and let life unfold through you, much more than, I'm going to do this, I'm in control. So when I position myself in the creative flow of the edge, which is the edge is this place of great intensity, we realize an increase in energy, excitement, and emergence. Things start emerging. Sometimes it feels like a gentle stream. You're in the flow. You remember those days you wake up and everything unfolds beautiful. So it's a gentle stream, everything. But sometimes it's like a roller coaster. And sometimes the intensity is so high that we need to create sinks, like she didn't know how to say sinks, or like little baskets to store aspects of the flow to use later. I also tend sometimes to go to in my meditations, in my morning attunements, to go to the source of the flow and just rest there. Take a pause. We may need a pause now. I spoke too much.
We will have a pause after your talk.
Yeah. Can I finish 2 more concepts?
Yes.
Okay. There's one more. So position yourself in the flow. It is a very, very important one. A second attitude is related to serendipity. And I understand that in French you have the same word, serendipity. Serendipity means the accidental discovery of something valuable. Accidental discovery of something valuable. The edges are full of surprises. If you're in the edge, if you position yourself, you work in the edges of society, of ecosystems. But making something from the unexpected is not a question of luck. Is a question of enactment. Making something of a surprise is not, oh, that person is so lucky. No, it's a question of enactment. Sometimes in the edge things appear, but you don't pay attention. You don't enact. So that is not serendipity. So for this to happen, why doing this edge work, this regenerative work? I would say be alert and curious so that the chances of accidental discovery increases. In the edges, there are lots of opportunities of surprise, but if you're not alert, they come in and out, and nothing is added to the systems that you're working with. And the final one is a neologism. It's called bisociation. It's not association, it's bisociation. Bisociation involves connecting 2 seemingly unrelated things into a new matrix of meaning. I'll try to give an example. In bisociation, basically, you bring together 2 ideas or 2 things that seem to have nothing in common, and something else, a new matrix of meaning emerges, and something new. For instance, auction and web. You have eBay. You have web and auction. Then you create eBay. Another one that I discovered when I was in Brazil was like poison and anti-aging. What do you think it is? Botox. Have poison and anti-aging, and then you create something. How on earth you imagine these two unrelated things can create something, a new matrix of meaning? But we're not going, as designers, this is just as an example. Now, but for this to happen, one needs to dance between, and that's my experience, you need to dance between the rational, concrete mind that sees patterns, that is alert, and the intuitive, abstract mind, so that a new matrix of meaning can emerge. Only your concrete mind you don't get by association. You need to live there and here at the same time and dance between the two. So, as we continue advancing the SDGs agenda as regenerative practitioners, make sure that you position yourself in the flow and become a co-worker with the creative force of evolution, nothing less than this. That's why we incarnated as humans in this moment of convergence of crisis. Awaken your eagle eye so that surprises can be transformed in something valuable. And start practicing by association towards new patterns of things to come. So the case for supporting the SDGs is incredibly compelling. We have been asked to do something that has never done before. Our role of forward-looking world workers, regenerative practitioners, is key in seizing this SDGs framework potential